Between 1982 and 1983, the bodies of 3 young boys strangled, bitten, and stabbed were found across the states of Maine and Nebraska. For the police, it was difficult to make any progress without the slightest lead. The residents were terrified, all convinced that a serial killer was lurking in the area. But just when the investigation had hit a dead end, a single coincidence would be enough to catch the culprit. An IQ of 123, rare erudition, a promising military career, an exceptional sense of organization, and the discipline of a true Boy Scout who really was John Joubert. The police would soon realize that rage and hatred had accompanied him throughout his life, right from the very beginning. Without further delay, let's dive into the story of John Joubert, the Boy Scout killer. Lawrence, Massachusetts, 1968. In the dining room, Beverly Joubert was packing her last belongings. Already wrapped in newspaper, plates, tea and coffee sets, silverware, tablecloths, and soup tureens. Climbing onto a chair, she took down from the wall the portraits of the Pope and the late President Kennedy, assassinated in 1963. A tragic year, the year her son was born, just 2 months later. Naturally, she, like many other women in the maternity ward, named her baby John or Joan in memory of the fallen president. The only Irish Catholic ever to hold the presidency of the United States. Taken too soon, far too soon, she sighed. Beverly Joubert had just received her divorce papers. She hadn't dared to touch them, as if their contents might burn her. Yet she was the one who had decided it had to end. She had recently sensed her husband's infidelities, especially when she would help him out at their cafeteria in Gritty Mill, where people had, for the first time, tasted real Italian pizza. Lately, he hadn't even bothered to hide it anymore. Once he went as far as grabbing a blonde woman's backside and kissing her passionately right in front of everyone after she had been flirting with him from her table. Beverly held back from making a scene. She wasn't raised that way. Before long, he had built a solid reputation as a womanizer and a brute who refused to take no for an answer. At home, he had only laid a hand on her once, never doing it again, but also never apologizing. For Beverly, the lawful wife, it was too much humiliation. She had believed that the vows exchanged on her wedding day had no expiration date. The priest had lectured her for a long time. A wife should only seek divorce in the most extreme cases. But Father, I am an extreme case. You must forgive this offense, my daughter. Our Lord taught us forgiveness, just as he forgave those who crucified him. She had almost given in, but then she pulled herself together. She could no longer live with the father of her children, not after what he had done. She caught the disappointed gaze of Father Gavin, who wasted no time in reminding her that from now on, only a civil marriage in some ordinary registry office would ever be granted to her, never again a church wedding. So be it. Beverly, now ex-Mrs. Joubert, had no plans to remarry anyway. At the wheel of her Dodge, her 2 children seated in the back, she left Massachusetts behind, along with its gossip, its prying do-gooders watching for the slightest misstep, and its judgmental Irish community, firmly aligned with the priest. She had chosen to leave in broad daylight, following behind the mover's truck. She knew that behind every window, eyes were watching her, the wife who had thrown her poor husband out without seeking compromise. She's neither the first nor the last, everyone does it at some point or another. Those words had come straight from her own sister's mouth, an attempt to trivialize the whole affair. She too had been a cheated wife, but to preserve appearances, her place in the church, and her husband's paycheck, she had chosen to look the other way, waiting for things to settle down. And they had, thank God. Beverly, why do you always have to go against the tide? Her mother harshly reproached her over the phone. Unlike the other women in her circle, Beverly had a job, a rather remarkable one for the time. She was an accountant, earning a steady salary every month, making her financially independent from her husband. A first. To lighten the already heavy atmosphere, ex-Mrs. Joubert turned on some music. In the rearview mirror, she saw Johnny, 6, and Jane, 4, huddled together, their little faces sullen. They already missed their father. Because after the disappointment and humiliation, after the shock of court papers, the division of assets, and the ex leaving with his suitcases without looking back, other emotions surfaced, ones that would stay: resentment, jealousy, hatred, and the idea that the children were now bargaining chips belonging to just one parent. Beverly decided that from now on, that's how it would be. Even if they begged her on their knees, neither John nor Jane would ever see their father again. She would play both roles, as so many mothers had done before her. She thought back to the year President Kennedy died and the great wave of national mourning that followed. She remembered going with her mother and two sisters to light a candle at the chapel, praying for his soul. Her mother was dressed in black, just like the widow, Jacqueline Kennedy. Heavy tears rolled down her cheeks, which she hastily wiped away with a crisp white handkerchief. One John was leaving and another was arriving. 2 months later, in the middle of a scorching summer, Beverly gave birth to her firstborn, a baby boy so small he looked like a preemie. Lost in her memories, she glanced absently into the rearview mirror, only to lock eyes with her son's dark, defiant stare, a look she had never seen from him before. What's gotten into this kid? Why is he looking at me like that? And when is Daddy coming to see us? Little Jane asked, yawning. Daddy left with a bad woman because he doesn't want us anymore. He won't come back, that's what he wants. From now on, it'll just be the three of us. Isn't that fun, kids? You're lying. And they had, thank God. John's chilling stare in the rearview mirror froze his mother for a moment. From that instant, she knew that things would never be the same again. John Joubert was born on July 2nd, 1963, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. At the time, his father, Joseph, who had distant French ancestry, worked as a cook and waiter in a small diner he had bought from an Italian family. His mother, Beverly Cassidy, of Irish descent, worked as an accountant for a small auto insurance company. His only sister, Jane, was born in 1965. John grew up in a stable home where Catholic faith was ever present. By the age of 3, he could already read, making him something of a child prodigy. During the first years of his life, the family enjoyed a comfortable social status. His father successfully expanded his restaurant in the small town of Gritty Mill. Business was thriving, and income was steady, allowing the Jouberts to take vacations and set aside some savings. John attended the local parochial school run by the church and was appointed an altar boy for Sunday Mass, a responsibility he took very seriously. But at the age of 6, the idyllic world he had always known suddenly crumbled with his parents' divorce. Deeply attached to his father, John struggled to accept the idea of living apart from him. He was not the only one suffering. His mother, despite initially pushing for the separation due to her husband's repeated infidelities, soon began to bitterly regret her decision. It was, after all, the 1960s, a time when divorce was still frowned upon, and machismo was second nature to most men. A woman who chose to divorce, as Beverly Joubert had done, found herself at odds with the entire community, the sacred institutions, and society as a whole. The father vanished instantly from his children's lives, and for a long time, they had no clear idea of his new address. Beverly Joubert never truly forgave her husband for his numerous infidelities, and she chose to take revenge in the cruelest way possible by preventing him from seeing Johnny and Jane. In an era when shared custody was not yet common practice and traditional gender roles in families were strictly defined, her actions were considered entirely legitimate. Mother and children left their home state of Massachusetts and moved further north, settling in Maine, New England. The newly single-parent family rented a small apartment in a rundown working-class neighborhood of Portland. Having lost her accounting job due to the move, Beverly was forced to take on various low-paying jobs, first as a waitress, then as a supermarket cashier. Even though her ex-husband continued sending child support, she made her children live under extreme frugality. John, for instance, walked to school every day. Even though it was on the outskirts of the city, his mother outright refused to give him money for transportation. The relationship between mother and son gradually began to deteriorate as soon as they settled in Maine. Beverly became possessive, domineering, and authoritarian. Her children were not allowed to go out or form friendships with kids their age. She deprived them of all forms of entertainment, even year-end school parties, which they never attended. She claimed she couldn't afford to buy them costumes or decorations, nor contribute to cakes and drinks for the celebrations. The emptiness left by the father causes great suffering for John and his sister. John tries several times to sneak onto a bus back to Massachusetts to search for him. The shock is so intense that he starts imagining him walking in the street, in the supermarket, or even visiting him at night to read him a story as he knew so well how to do. One day, John pilfers a few dollars from the metal box his mother hides on a kitchen shelf. He leaves the house and rushes straight to the bus station to buy a ticket. What a surprise it is for him when he sees his mother appear out of nowhere, grab him by the collar of his shirt, and drag him to the car. Someone in the neighborhood had likely warned her upon seeing her son wandering alone at the station. That day, he is beaten for stealing money that did not belong to him and for defying the rules she had established. With each passing day, little John's hatred grows for the one who gave him life. He is convinced that she is solely responsible for the dissolution of their family. In 1970, Beverly Joubert finds a new job at a branch and is forced to travel between Portland and Boston. It is at this time that John and his sister begin spending more and more time with babysitters. The presence of these young women, often still in high school and with no real qualifications, aside from wanting to earn some pocket money while keeping one eye on the TV and the other on the children, fascinates the little boy to no end. Strangely enough, none of them ever set foot in the Joubert's house again after their first visit. Did they do something wrong? No, ma'am. Have they been disobedient? No, not really. Did they refuse to go to bed early? It wasn't until the sixth babysitter, a certain Trixie Davenport, that the truth was revealed about the early departures of the previous nannies. Mrs. Beverly, it pains me to say this, but Johnny behaves more or less. How can I say this without upsetting you? He tried to strangle me, that's it. John likes Trixie a lot, though. She can make fluffy pancakes and burgers with lots of fries. She's blonde, smiles, and wears tight pink bodysuits. 8 years old, he has strange, contradictory feelings for her. He dreams of kissing her, killing her, and then eating her. Trixie, still unaware of his macabre plans, plays with him, playing with toy cars and airplanes. It's only during a game of hide-and-seek that he jumps out of his hiding place and grabs her neck by surprise. Believing it to be a boy's game, the nanny laughs it off before realizing that things are going too far, and it's only at the end of a fierce struggle to free herself from John's merciless grip that she understands that this was anything but a simple game. Despite the incident with Trixie, Beverly Joubert remains in total denial. She knows her son often does as he pleases, that he can sometimes be quite stubborn, but the thought of him actually trying to kill someone never crosses her mind. She is convinced that the babysitter exaggerated the events, probably to cover up her own lack of authority over the children. The babysitting experience would end there. In 1976, at the age of 13, John experiences his first emotional turmoil. Having spent his childhood fantasizing about his babysitters and almost taking a twisted pleasure in scaring them, he now faces a major problem. He feels no attraction to girls. His homosexuality terrifies and unsettles him to the core. He doesn't dare speak to anyone about it, not even the school psychologist, fearing she might tell his mother everything. More than once, he catches himself staring at the other boys, naked in the locker room after gym class. The budding masculinity of his classmates, and even more so that of the baseball team members, leaves him shaken to the point that, at night, alone in his bed, he keeps thinking about it. On top of that, he is plagued by physical insecurities. While most of the boys at school are tall, blonde, athletic, and full of energy, he is short, dark-haired, frail, with the miserable look of a beaten dog. His visible discomfort makes him an easy target for bullying and harassment, and no one ever steps in to defend him. Nevertheless, he is a highly intelligent boy. With an IQ of 123, well above average, he excels in multiple subjects, earning the titles of top of the class, and teacher's pet, certainly not the best attributes for gaining popularity. A loner with no real friends, John fills his world with the characters from the books he constantly reads. Illustrated novels and science magazines are a true revelation to him. To earn pocket money, he becomes a paperboy, delivering newspapers in his neighborhood on weekends and during school vacations. He saves up and even manages to pay part of his tuition at Chevers High School, a Catholic boys' school, with his mother agreeing to fund the other half. The arrival of Brian Lebec, a Franco-Canadian, in his class changes all of John's preconceived ideas about rejection. The two teenagers become inseparable, united by their personal miseries. Like him, Brian had a very hard time with his parents' divorce. Like him, he has an awkward physique, is overweight, and wears thick glasses. Soon the other boys start calling them sissies, with John being nicknamed Jujube and Brian Barbecue. At home, things don't get any better. John increasingly hates his mother and shows it openly. In return, she torments him, humiliates him, lectures him for everything and nothing, constantly putting him down at every opportunity. Humiliated, rejected both at school and at home, John turns into a ticking time bomb. Then comes the revelation: the Boy Scouts. It's important to know that Scouting is a real institution in the United States, like a rite of passage for both girls and boys. With its almost military tradition and all-male membership, it teaches resourcefulness and how to get out of tough situations in extreme conditions. John loves his green uniform and his red Basque beret, topped with an eagle's feather. The Boy Scouts of Maine, managed by the American Youth Association, becomes, in a way, his home, a substitute family where he feels for the first time useful and appreciated. During the summer vacations, John and his team camp in the Green North Woods forest. The nights spent under the stars, roasting marshmallows and telling scary stories, are the best memories of this time in his youth. John becomes so passionate about his activity that he eventually climbs the ranks and earns the title of Eagle Scout, the highest honor. As the vacation comes to an end, he reluctantly packs up his uniform and boots to return to school. The year 1979 is a decisive one, as it determines whether the student will be destined for brilliant university studies or if he will obtain a simple technical diploma. Despite his exceptional intelligence, John becomes increasingly uninterested in school. He, who had always been diligent and fearful of his teachers, begins skipping classes and exhibits violent, antisocial behavior. Neither expulsions nor punishments manage to tame him. Despite all of this, he still manages to graduate from high school with honors. He enrolls at Norwich University, a semi-private military institution located in Vermont, where he plans to study engineering. However, the program proves difficult, even for the brilliant student he has always been, and he eventually drops out at the end of the first semester. Without resources, abandoned by his mother, who refuses to offer him any financial support after this painful failure, unable to find a job that matches his ambitions, he decides to enlist in the United States Air Force, where at least he is guaranteed food, shelter, and laundry services, with the added possibility of rising through the ranks. Drawing from his experience as a former Boy Scout, he adapts easily to the strictness of the barracks, where he fails at the age of 19. Here we go again. John finds himself surrounded by men on all sides in a close and intimate environment. In the dorms, showers, training, and dining hall, brunettes, blondes, and men of color, bodies constantly brushing and colliding. His homosexual tendencies resurface, and he finds himself once again watching from the sidelines in the communal showers, stealing glances when the others have their backs turned. He is aware that, in the military, such behavior, though prohibited, is somewhat protected by a kind of code of silence, the famous "don't ask, don't tell." The homosexuality of some is therefore carefully concealed and lived behind closed doors, without the risk of it being exposed outside the barracks or reported to their respective families. It was during one of his leaves for the holidays that John returned to Massachusetts, with the long-held hope of finding his father. For 3 days, he wanders the alleys of the town of Lawrence where he grew up, convinced that he'll come face to face with his progenitor at the turn of an alley. But Joubert père gives no sign of life. Perhaps he's moved on to a neighboring town or even another state. John flips through the pages of the phone book in search of every Joubert in the U.S., but there's no sign of Joseph, his father. The sense of despondency and despair that has marked his entire childhood and adolescence kicks in again, and once again, it's his mother who takes the fall. Like an old movie unfolding before his eyes, he relives the images of their departure from the family home. The mover's truck filled with their old furniture, the stern-faced neighbors watching them go like pariahs. His mother has managed to alienate everyone, including her own family, and Father Gavin, who is so indulgent with his parishioners. She's got a knack for ruining everything, as if she's doing it on purpose. John spends the next few nights getting drunk in the city's seedy bars, his soldier's uniform giving him panache and commanding respect. For the first time, he feels all-powerful, but neither the alcohol nor his addiction to narcotics, later developed, could calm his inner rage. He needed something else. On December 28, 1979, Sarah Conti, a 9-year-old girl, was playing in front of her house when someone ran past and stabbed her in the back with a pencil. By the time her parents were alerted by her screams, the assailant had already disappeared. Concealed behind a wall, John sneers with all his teeth. In his ears, the child's cries of pain are still ringing, and he's feeling downright sexually aroused. In January 1980, Vicky Goff, a young woman of 27, was walking along Deering Avenue to the University of Maine, where she was studying. This was the moment a young man chose to grab her from behind, almost slashing her jaw with a razor blade, while trying to close her mouth to prevent her from screaming and alarming people, before fleeing as he saw people coming in their direction. Vicky Goff, who had to undergo 2 operations, was unable to describe her attacker's face to the police. The case is dismissed, and John Joubert takes more and more pleasure in the bloodshed. In March 1980, in the small Maine town of Back Cove, 9-year-old Michael Witham suffered another attack. The little boy was taking a leisurely stroll along Baxter Boulevard when he was literally abducted by a mysterious individual. Michael is dragged to a secluded wooded area in Oakdale. There, the strange individual starts asking him increasingly bizarre and incoherent questions before grabbing him from behind and slitting his throat with a hunting knife. Michael miraculously escaped death, but his wound required 12 stitches. Although a search was launched after this third such attack, no suspects were arrested. Nevertheless, these knife and razor attacks shocked the local population to such an extent that, from then on, not a day went by in the schools without the teaching and administrative staff issuing recommendations to prevent children from going home alone after school. In April 1980, a University of Maine student was stabbed in the stomach with a knife while crossing the street. During his convalescence, he manages to give a description of his attacker, and a suspect is arrested before being released when the police discover that he has an alibi. Meanwhile, John Joubert is sent to Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska, to train as a radar technician. Bellevue was a sort of pleasure town, with a population of around 22,000 at the time, and on one of his rare leaves, John Joubert went there solo, hoping to spot a few men who, like him, were looking for one-night stands. He also joined the local Boy Scout troop, where he became chief assistant, thanks to his former Eagle Scout rank and long experience in the field. After this last assignment, and benefiting from an externship in 1982, John returned to his mother's home in Portland and settled into his childhood bedroom for an indefinite period. It was then that his descent into crime really began. On August 22, 1982, Richard Stetson, an 11-year-old boy with red hair and a cheerful, sociable disposition, goes out for a run in the park near the family home. As evening fell and he still hadn't returned, his worried parents called 911. The boy's body was found the next day, August 23, 1982, by a motorist who had stopped when he saw a strange shape at the side of the road. The autopsy revealed that Richard had been stabbed to death. All he had on was his t-shirt, which suggests that his assailant tried to rape him, but failed. Nevertheless, he gave him a large bite wound on the left thigh. The place where his corpse was found shows no sign of the murderer, With no solid evidence to work with, the police remained at half-mast. A year later, a suspect is arrested and released, and the case, though still open, no longer enjoys the attention it once did. A month later, Danny Joe Eberly, a young paperboy, was last seen distributing the paper in his neighborhood of Bellevue, Nebraska. Danny was 13 years old and was murdered on September 18, 1983. The alarm was raised by his parents when his school called to say that Danny hadn't turned up for class. His remains were found 2 days later in a field just outside town. His killer had tied him up, taped his mouth shut, and stabbed him several times. It is likely that he had been touched, although his autopsy revealed that he had not been sexually assaulted. A week later, a local resident finds Danny's bag, still full of newspapers, and his bicycle thrown into a rubbish dump. They are held as evidence. Under pressure from the media, who linked Danny's murder to that of Richard Stetson in Maine, the Nebraska police called on profiler and FBI agent Robert Ressler to help them with their investigations. With years of experience in federal law enforcement, Robert Ressler has since turned his attention to a new trend: serial killers. His initial findings stipulated that the corpses found by the roadside and on a plot of land proved that the killer had to be small in stature, which prevented him from carrying the bodies further to better conceal them. This non-dissimulation also alerts the FBI agent, who is certain that the killer is an amateur with deviant behavior and probably a pedophile and necrophiliac. The investigation is thrown into turmoil when another body is found. This time it was 12-year-old Christopher Walden, whose lifeless body was found by hunters in a grove on December 2, 1983. Christopher Walden's throat had been slit and he had bled to death. 10 days after the body of the third victim was found, investigators discovered new evidence at the scene of the crime: intricately knotted cords, a method learned from military personnel, and all those who had received training of this caliber and had ever camped outdoors. The cords were immediately sent for analysis to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Their analysis revealed a composition of at least 100 different fiber colors, an unusual type of rope rarely found in shops. Robert Ressler is convinced that whoever committed the murders is one and the same individual. In his profiling report, he lists his characteristics, adding a new element. The killer must surely work in an environment where he rubs shoulders with young boys, probably a sports coach, summer camp counselor, or Boy Scout leader, since he knows how to tie extremely complex rope knots. The data sheets of all the Boy Scouts in the area are examined with a fine-tooth comb, and some are even questioned to no avail. The following days saw a succession of eyewitnesses. At least 3 people were said to have seen Christopher Walden for the last time before his death. They said he was accompanied by a young man, probably aged between 18 and 25, no taller than Christopher, with black eyes and hair. Robert Ressler hurried to take note, and with these elements in hand, a first sketch was made. A fourth witness, a Bellevue resident out walking her dog that day, reported that Christopher had been abducted by a man driving a beige car. According to the same person, the car's license plate began with the letter R. The font reviews the different origins, beginning with this letter of the alphabet: Raleigh in North Carolina, Riverside in California, Richmond in Virginia, Rockford in Illinois, Rochester in Minnesota, and the list goes on and on. A list of every make of beige car produced in the country is provided by the various car dealerships. To no avail. Pressed for time, the police gathered all the evidence they could from witnesses. By early January 1984, the investigation into Christopher's murder was still in its early stages. But something happens to change the course of events. On January 11, 1984, Barbara Weaver, a kindergarten teacher at a Maine elementary school, was sitting at her desk preparing her students' report cards when she saw a man sitting behind the wheel of his car from her classroom window. It wasn't the first time the teacher had seen the vehicle, which was all the more suspicious as it didn't belong to any of the teachers or parents. Involuntarily, Barbara's eyes meet those of the car's driver, and for a moment she feels a chill and a bad feeling of foreboding. Without thinking too hard, she grabs her pen and writes the car's license plate number on a piece of paper. Looking up, she noticed that the car was still there, but the man had disappeared. Just then, the classroom door opens with a bang. Standing in front of Barbara Weaver is a small man, barely 1.60 meters tall, with black hair, brown eyes, and a puny look. He's young, no more than 20. He pulls a hunting knife from his pocket and, without taking his eyes off her, threatens her with it if she ever feels like opening her mouth and telling on him. Barbara realizes that he's probably on the run, trying to evade the police. Fearing that he would carry out his threats, the schoolteacher managed to escape in extremis and ran to a nearby house, from where she finally called the police. Within a day, the police in Nebraska and Maine received the long-awaited answers to their questions and doubts. Christopher Walden's killer has been denounced by a schoolteacher, and he finally confesses to his crime. Robert Ressler takes the first plane to New England, arriving at Bangor Airport in the middle of the night. Now he has to interrogate the murderer to get to the bottom of it. In the interrogation room, Ressler is first struck by the killer's youthful, almost delicate appearance. There's still something childlike in his eyes, and at the same time, something troubled and secretive. Throughout the interrogation, John Joubert is incredibly calm, cooperative, and even smiling at times. The FBI agent, who has seen countless deranged, dangerous, and conscienceless individuals come and go throughout his career, is both frightened and fascinated by the figure before him, whose short legs don't quite touch the ground, like an 8-year-old. John Joubert confesses to the murders of Richard Stetson and Danny Jo Eberly. He details the circumstances in which the first two boys were kidnapped before being killed. He also admits to having been attracted to their corpses, but did not seek necrophilic sex with them. He recounts that the bite mark found on little Richard's thigh was made long after his death. Portland Sheriff's Deputy Jeff Davis recounts, "When he, Joubert, was arrested, he didn't try to deny anything. He cooperated with us with a baffling ease for a killer of his species. To use his expression, he was emptying his bag. What's more, he was highly intelligent, almost gifted." John Joubert empties his bag chronologically, encouraged by the two police officers who want to get him to talk more. He recounts his unhappy childhood, his parents' broken marriage, the years of hardship and deprivation in Portland, maternal despotism, sexual frustrations, the painfully broken bond with his father, humiliations at school, years in the barracks, his penchant for men. To conclude, he declares himself an apostate of the Catholic Church, the source, according to him, of all the misfortunes that befell his family. "Except for Father Gavin, a good Irish priest who often helped my mother. If you ever come across him, tell him that Johnny asked for his forgiveness," he added in a small voice. When asked by one of the detectives if he would kill again if the opportunity arose, John Joubert replied without flinching, "I'm afraid it will happen again. Yes." In February 1984, John Joubert was examined by psychiatric experts who declared him to be suffering from a compulsive behavior disorder with sadistic and schizoid tendencies. His trial began in March of the same year when he pleaded guilty to the 2 counts of murder of Christopher Walden and Danny Jo Eberly. He twice retracted his statements before again admitting his guilt. He appeared before a panel of 3 judges who imposed the death penalty, death by electrocution. In 1990, he was convicted of the first-degree murder of Richard Stetson. John Joubert appealed this decision shortly afterwards. However, he makes a most unusual statement when he publicly apologizes to the parents of his victims and to the people he assaulted in the 1970s in Portland. "To all those people I have harmed in one way or another, I ask forgiveness. Forgiveness for all the wrong I have done you." At his appeal, he declares that the electric chair is a cruel and unusual punishment that goes against human dignity. His appeals for clemency reach the U.S. Supreme Court, but are all rejected. John Joubert remains on death row for another 12 years, in a totally isolated cell. During this long period, he read a number of legal texts to understand the workings of the law, as well as the works of Ernest Hemingway, Albert Camus' L'étranger, and the theses of Sigmund Freud. He also developed a great talent for drawing and produced several sketches in which crime and bloodied bodies were the main subject. Shortly before his execution, he declares himself a changed man, wishing to settle down and lead a normal life. He is occasionally visited by prison visitors, but twice turned away by a chaplain who wanted to hear his confessions. In 1994, John Joubert spoke for the first time of an alleged marriage project with a woman living in Ireland who had been corresponding with him for a year and whom he described as his first and true love. His plan came to nothing. He died in the electric chair at 7 a.m. on July 17, 1996, in Lincoln Penitentiary, Nebraska, just a few days after his 33rd birthday. His last meal was a chicken burger and a cherry Coke, and he refused the traditional last cigarette and the prison chaplain's blessing. John Joubert never married or had children. His mother, Beverly, and younger sister, Jane, never visited him throughout his incarceration. Sheriff's Deputy Jeff Davis will say of him, "No matter what he said or what he promised before his death, it won't take away the horror suffered by his victims and the horror in which their relatives will eternally live." John Joubert never distinguished himself from the people he used to associate with and live with. To most, he was just a nerdy little kid, very discreet, with few friends. The Boy Scouts he worked with always described him as responsible, friendly, and reliable. But between what he really was and what he let on, there remained a complex and impenetrable gray area. Nor would the motive for his crimes ever be fully clarified, as he himself was always careful to leave the matter shrouded in mystery. Federal agent Robert Ressler has written a book about his profiling experience and his confrontation with Joubert and other criminals of his ilk. The book brings together testimonies from various police forces, forensic experts, and conversations with the assassins themselves. It is considered a Bible for crime buffs. It is entitled "Whoever Fights Monsters: My 20 Years Tracking Serial Killers for the FBI." Robert Ressler also inspired the role of Agent Bill Tench in the TV series Midhunter. In the United States, death row inmates benefit from a special system, allowing them to use a variety of appeals to delay or postpone their execution date, which often explains the lengthy periods spent on death row. Some remain on death row for more than 15 years or die long before their execution. Suicides are also common. In some prisons, death row inmates can also celebrate their nuptials and consummate their relationships under conditions set by the court. Often, these romances are maintained during the period of incarceration by means of letters, but few of them actually lead to anything serious. In addition to first-degree murder, premeditated rape, hijacking, and large-scale drug trafficking are capital offenses in the USA. Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, Colorado, and Mississippi still top the list of states with the highest rate of execution by lethal injection nationwide.